Good afternoon and welcome to the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus web meeting. I'm Lisa Hanaira with the Council of State Governments Midwestern Office. I staff the caucus, and assisting me with the logistics for today's web meeting is my colleague Caitlin Ty. Tim Anderson from CSG Midwest is also helping out. Here is the agenda for today's web meeting. We'll begin with a few words from Great Lakes Legislative Caucus Chair, Representative Corey Mason from Wisconsin. Next, we'll hear from our featured speaker, Matthew McKenna of the Northeast Midwest Institute, who will talk about federal budget and legislative activities pertaining to the Great Lakes. Following the presentation, we'll hear from members of the caucus's executive committee who will report on state and provincial developments. We'll conclude with an update on caucus activities, including a current sign-on letter opportunity, plans for the 2017 annual meeting in Toronto, and an upcoming Great Lakes policy workshop for Indiana legislators. We'll start with a few housekeeping items. First, this meeting is being recorded. The recording will be posted on the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus website tomorrow at the address you see on the screen. It'll also be available on CSG's YouTube channel. You'll receive a follow-up message with information on where you can access the recording. To reduce the possibility of feedback or other external noise, the conference will be in listen-only mode. After the presentation, we'll open up the line for questions. If you have a question, please let us know either by typing your question in the GoToWebinar Questions pane or by clicking the hand icon to raise your hand. If you accidentally click on the hand icon, just click it again and it'll turn off. If you do plan to ask a question, please make sure to enter your audio PIN, which you'll find in the audio pane. We won't be able to unmute your line if you don't enter your audio PIN. And if you're just calling in and not viewing the slides, we won't be able to see you at all to open up your line. So if you have a question in that case, please email me at GLLC@csg.org. Again, that's GLLC@csg.org. Now I'll turn the floor over to the chair of the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus, Wisconsin Representative Corey Mason.
Thanks, Lisa, and thank you everyone for attending today. I'd like to acknowledge Senator Boer from Michigan, who's the Vice Chair of the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus, and Senator Ann Rest of Minnesota, who is a past chair of the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus. So the reason we're doing these web meetings is because the caucus's annual meeting, which is our major event every year for interacting and conducting business, is a great event, but not all members can attend that. So we're holding quarterly web meetings timed around the annual meeting to give members regularly scheduled opportunities over the course of the year to stay apprised of issues. And I think as we find out on today's topics, there certainly are timely issues facing funding around GLRI that simply cannot wait until our annual meeting in September. So there will be additional web meetings planned for June and December of this year with a break in September because we'll be in Toronto for our annual meeting. Just as a reminder, if you're new to the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus or you need a refresher, the caucus is the only binational, nonpartisan organization dedicated solely to educating, engaging, in other words, serving state and provincial legislators from the Great Lakes region. The goals of the caucus are to facilitate regional exchange of ideas on key Great Lakes issues, to strengthen the role of state and provincial legislators in that policy-making process, and to promote the restoration and protection of the Great Lakes. Membership currently stands at 186 enrolled members and growing. I would remind people that the best way to grow that membership is when legislators ask other legislators to join. So if you haven't yet this session, I would encourage you to invite a colleague of yours from your state or province to become a member of the caucus. There is no cost, and it really works best when we hear from as many members as possible. So today's speaker is certainly very timely. We have an opportunity to hear about what's being proposed, if you haven't already, at the federal level in the United States under the new administration and the new Congress. Our featured speaker is Matthew McKenna from the Northeast Midwest Institute, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan research and policy organization based in D.C. As director of the Great Lakes Program for the Northeast Midwest Institute, Mr. McKenna works with congressional offices and administrative agencies on Great Lakes protection and restoration programs and initiatives. Mr. McKenna spoke on last year's legislative review webinar, so it's good to have him back. Mr. McKenna, what we'd like to have you do is speak for about 15 minutes and then leave time for questions, as I'm sure there will be many with lots of interesting developments around funding around GLRI and other programs that affect the Great Lakes. Mr. McKenna, you have the floor.
Thank you, Representative Mason. I really appreciate the introduction. Thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss these important federal issues with everyone on the line today. You can, I guess, go to the next slide, please. Oops. Okay, well, I'll start from here. Oh, perfect. The legislative outlook. Sorry, my screen was a little screwy. So just quickly, these are sort of the issues that I'm going to touch upon today. We'll discuss the President's budget that was released last week, the appropriations process that, as Representative Mason mentioned, the cuts to GLRI, and what federal lawmakers here in D.C., especially within the region, are doing to try to make sure that the GLRI remains funded. We'll also briefly touch on the veto legislation and then some specific bills that have been proposed that would impact Great Lakes, and then I'll also kind of discuss broader picture what I expect coming down the pipeline in Congress. So you can go to the next slide, please. So last week, President Trump released his skinny budget that recommended a wide range of deep cuts and the elimination of many programs that were in balance, a recommendation of a $54 billion increase, mostly for defense spending. This slide kind of has a bunch of the programs that I thought were probably most relevant to the Great Lakes, but I'm going to focus my time on the GLRI and the EPA, as I think those are probably the most significant cuts to most of the programs that your constituents are paying closest attention to for the Great Lakes. As Representative Mason mentioned, the GLRI was proposed to be eliminated from the FY 2018 federal budget. GLRI has been funded in the past roughly $300 million, and there was a rumor before the president released the budget that they would cut it, or they proposed a reduction of 97% to $10 million. Well, it turns out the news is even worse. It was a full elimination of the program, which was authorized by Congress last Congress. So it's a very big issue. Last week we had our Great Lakes Washington fly-in, where a lot of advocates and stakeholders came in to lobby their members of Congress, and this was obviously one of the major issues that people are talking about. We also had our congressional breakfast reception on the day the budget came out, and I can make sure everyone knows on this phone that every member that came to speak, and we had about 12 to 14 members show up to address the group. GLRI was one of the top priorities in making sure that the delegation does everything they can to prevent any significant cuts and hopefully move forward with full funding. Additionally, the EPA is facing potential dramatic cuts. Overall, President Trump's budget would slash the EPA by 31% and reduce the EPA's workforce by roughly 20% of its current employees. There would also be a proposed reduction of grants to state and local governments by approximately $482 million. So these are major cuts, and obviously EPA plays an important role in the work that goes on to restoration efforts and to all the work that everyone on this call does to provide for the health of the Great Lakes. These are significant cuts. A couple programs that were not on this list on my slide that I also want to mention: the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers budget under the Trump proposal would slash it about $1 billion to $500 billion for FY 2018. And also, the president's budget would also zero out discretionary funding for FEMA's National Flood Insurance Program's Flood Hazard Mapping Program. And I know that there's a lot of communities within the Great Lakes Basin that would probably be very affected by potential loss of money for local governments to have proper flood hazard mapping. One area that there was actually increase in the EPA's budget by the Trump proposal is in water infrastructure. The state revolving funds would see an increase in funding. The budget outline, which is a preliminary outline, so there's not a lot of details in it, asks for robust funding for drinking water and wastewater infrastructure. Go to the next slide, please. Congress has about 20 days to finish up the remaining FY17 appropriation bills. They left in December during the lame duck, and they just passed the CR through the first 3 months of the year, trying to give the incoming administration more say into any potential budget cuts. Currently, House and Senate appropriators have not decided how they're going to handle the remainder of the fiscal year. The House, at the beginning of this month, passed the FY 2017 Defense Appropriations Bill, which they had pre-negotiated with the Senate. This is a likely vehicle to move an omnibus bill down the line to keep the government funded for the remainder of the year through September 30th. However, it's not been officially determined if this was how they would decide to handle the remainder of the appropriation bills. Congress also could potentially consider a supplemental bill to provide additional defense funding and also additional money to start a border wall on the Mexican border that President Trump had proposed during his campaign and has since issued an executive order teeing up construction. But in order for them to start, they need the funding. So there's a lot of speculation that Congress could consider a supplemental appropriations bill and include money for that. The House and Senate Appropriations Committee have already begun holding member hearings where they're seeking member input for the subcommittees, including the Interior Subcommittee and the Energy and Water Committee, Energy and Water Subcommittee. I know Great Lakes members have gone before the committee to testify on GLLC and Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund and a lot of the important accounts that are key to their constituencies. Additionally, this week, the House and Senate Appropriations Committees have started to hold hearings on the President's budget release. The President's actual budget, the more detailed, where they'll actually go line by line, account by account, likely won't come out till May, just because they're continuing to beef up their organization within OMB since the director has been approved and in full force. You can go to the next slide, please. So obviously one of the biggest issues that I think folks back in the basin are hearing about is this proposed cut to the GLRI. Like I said before, we had our Great Lakes fly-in last week, and this was one of the main issues that people discussed. And there's been a lot of champions. The Great Lakes Task Force, both the House and the Senate, this is one of their top priorities, making sure that GLRI is properly funded. If you go to many Great Lakes lawmakers' websites, you can see that they've released statements in opposition to the cuts and their pledges to restore funding. The GLRI has received a large bipartisan support in the past. Last fall, during the word debate, the GLRI was passed by an overwhelming overwhelming vote of 407 to 18. I did want to note that one of the no votes was cast by former Congressman Mick Mulvaney, who's now the OMB director. So that is something that we've run into working with offices that people are aware of, is that the person in charge of the President's budget has not supported this program in the past. He's one of the few members that had not supported it, and he's traditionally been a pretty big budget hawk. And part of the justification that the administration has given for the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative and other regional restoration efforts like the Chesapeake Bay, which is also zeroed out in the President's budget, is that these programs should be funded at the local level. Obviously, what Great Lakes lawmakers and other elected officials have argued is that these funding, especially through GLRI, have helped leverage local and private funding for restoration efforts. And I think that's a message that a lot of people on Capitol Hill are going to continue to push, especially with the Appropriations Committee moving forward, trying to properly fund GLRI. The Senate Great Lakes Task Force, led by co-chair Senator Stabenow from Michigan and Senator Portman from Ohio, sent a letter to EPA right before the President's budget came out, when there was a rumor that the administration would propose a 97% cut to the GLRI. And also the House and I believe the Senate are also working on letters to the Appropriations Committee in support of robust funding, namely $300 million as Congress had authorized at the end of 2016 for the GLRI. Next slide, please. Next, I will briefly touch on the Vessel Incidental Discharge Act, or otherwise known as VITA, which would make the U.S. Coast Guard the sole regulator of ballast water discharges in U.S. waters. It's been reintroduced in both the Senate and the House. The Senate Commerce Committee actually just about a month and a half ago reported the bill out of a markup by a voice vote. Several Democrat lawmakers, including two Great Lakes lawmakers, Senator Baldwin from Wisconsin, Senator Peters from Michigan, asked to be on the record in opposition to the legislation, citing concerns with invasive species, especially within the Great Lakes. Just a quick background on VITA. There's been numerous attempts in past Congresses to attach it to other legislation. Last Congress, at the end of the year, there was a push to include it in the National Defense Authorization Act, or the NDAA. And it was included in the House version. And when they went to conference it, it was actually one of the main sticking points which stopped the bill from moving forward for a while. There were other contentious issues, but the ballast water provision was one of them. And at the end, basically in the midnight hour, it was pulled out of the defense bill so that they could move the NDAA forward. So the VITA bill is currently been reintroduced and is pending. How it might move forward is unknown to me at this point. I know in conversations with the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee and the Senate Commerce Committee that it's a priority for their leadership moving forward. So I do think it's something that if people are invested in it, they need to keep it on their radar, because it's a bill that could be attached to whatever legislative vehicle is moving. And I know the House T&I Chairman Bill Schuster's made it a priority, and a lot of the Republicans and some Democrats on the Senate side have made this a priority as well. So that's a legislation to keep in mind that could move in the near future. Next slide, please. So I just want to give brief summary of a couple bills that directly impact the Great Lakes. These are not bigger legislative ticket items and probably won't move by themselves. But I just want to make sure people are aware of them as they start getting introduced in the new Congress. Congressman Dave Trott and Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, both from Michigan, have introduced the Preserve Our Lakes and Keep Our Environment Safe Act, which would direct federal regulators to decommission the Enbridge pipeline under the Straits of Mackinac if a Department of Transportation study found that the actual pipeline posed a significant threat to the Great Lakes. Congressman Kildee just offered legislation recently to ban aquaculture in the Great Lakes. Senator Stabenow and Peters and Congressman Kildee have also introduced a congressional resolution calling on the Canadian government not to permanently store nuclear wastes within the Great Lakes Basin. That stems from a facility that is Lake Huron over on the Quebec side that I know has been controversial, and I think a lot of local governments and a lot of local officials have been paying close attention to that issue. Next slide, please. And then a bill that was just introduced last week. This is the second Congress that's been introduced in by Congressman Quigley and Congressman Upton, is the Great Lakes Fishery Research Authorization Act, which authorizes the USGS's Great Lakes Science Center. And I know that Congressman Quigley has made this a priority of his, and Congressman Upton, being the first time he's been one of the original co-sponsors. I think this is legislation that can get bipartisan support within the delegation and really pushes the message of science is important in the Great Lakes. So I think it's a great messaging bill to let people know about. Next slide, please. I quickly wanted to go over some quick changes in the Congressional Great Lakes Task Force leadership. On the Senate side, we have a new co-chair on the Republican side, and Senator Portman. He previously last Congress was the vice chair. And then also replacing him in the vice chair position on the Republican side is Senator Todd Young, who is the freshman member from Indiana. On the House side, due to Candace Miller's from Michigan's retirement, Bill Huizenga from Western Michigan is the new Republican co-chair. We have two Republican and two Democrat co-chairs on the House side. Also, just so everyone knows, the Northeast Midwest Coalition is the organization that houses the Congressional Task Force. And we have new leadership within the coalition, and Congressman Dave Joyce from the suburbs of Cleveland in Ohio, and Congressman Rick Nolan from Minnesota, the Duluth area, will be the Republican and Democrat co-chairs. So it's great to have, for the Northeast Midwest Coalition, two Great Lakes lawmakers that really make these issues a priority of theirs. And then just quickly, I wanted to go through a couple of the recent actions by task force members. On the February 8th, the House task force sent a letter to the President urging him to make priority Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, to keep in mind and to act upon the threats that invasive species could pose to the Great Lakes, and also funding key infrastructure initiatives within the lakes, including such projects like the modernization of the Soo Locks, which could really benefit the region's economy greatly. On the 22nd of February, there was a bicameral letter that went to the Army Corps stressing the importance of the Soo Locks and the timely completion of the current study that they're doing on the actual modernization. On March 3rd, the House Task Force sent President Trump a letter regarding the delay in the Brandon Road study regarding glimmerous and invasive species. And then March 10th, the Senate sent a letter to EPA Administrator Pruitt about these potential dramatic cuts to GLLC and the concerns within the Senate task force. Next slide, please. And then I just wanted to give, these are sort of the bigger potential legislative vehicles that I envision coming down the line. There could be others. A major infrastructure legislation was a priority of President Trump's on the campaign trail. So far, the White House hasn't yet really released a whole lot of details. Senate Democrats unveiled a $1 trillion plan that would really focus on kind of all infrastructure, including airports, bridges, roads, seaports, but also includes like drinking water infrastructure and broadband. It's a very comprehensive package. So that has been released. There's a typo here. It should say the 2018 Farm Bill, excuse me. I apologize about that. But that's going to be a big issue. The Senate and House Agriculture Committees have already started holding preliminary hearings on a new Farm Bill. Typically, Congress reauthorizes the Farm Bill every 5 years. The last one, which was done in 2014, actually was a couple years late. It's a massive piece of legislation. There's a lot of controversial issues, including the SNAP program and farm subsidies that can hold it up because it is a very big bill. Senator Stabenow is the ranking member from Michigan on the Senate side, so she plays a very important role, and she will focus a lot on the Great Lakes issues that come up on the Farm Bill, especially with the conservation title. Potential movement on trade agreements, that was also a big theme during the campaign of President Trump, and he numerous times said that he wanted to get out of NAFTA. He could technically do that. He has to give Congress, I think, 6 months notice, and also the Canadian and Mexican governments. I personally think that there could be more of a movement by Congress to push for renegotiations and revisit such things as electric commerce and labor standards, environmental standards, because those weren't really on the table when NAFTA was originally negotiated in the 90s. A WRDA bill, Congress wants to try to get back to doing WRDA bills every 2 years, so I would assume, well, I shouldn't say assume, I think that Congress is going to make a big push to try to get some chief reports done and to get moving on authorizing Army Corps projects. Energy reform package, at the end of last Congress, there's a lot of talk that negotiators between the House and Senate were going to come up with a comprehensive energy package, especially on energy efficiency reforms for federal buildings and schools. That kind of fell through at the last second, but I think there'll be attempts by Congress to try to negotiate new energy legislation. And then tax reform seems like it's always talked about and on the table with not a lot of movement. I know when Congressman Kemp was chairman of the Ways and Means, he made a significant push to try to do tax reform, and it's just a tough thing to get done in Washington. But I do think that with especially Speaker Paul Ryan, being such a budget guy and really in the weeds on tax policy, that he will continue to make a push to try to do tax reform. Obviously, it depends on with all this health care stuff that's going on now, and with the ACA repeal and replace and how Republicans can move forward with that, I think will significantly determine what they're able to do with tax reform. So that's kind of just a brief overview of some of the bigger ticket issues, and so now I think I can open up to any questions people might have.
Yeah, if it's okay, I'd like to start with a question before we
Certainly.
go to Representative Mason. So I'm wondering if you can give a context on some of the other EPA funding in terms of how that'll affect the Great Lakes, or if you've got it broken out. I know, GLRI is fantastic, but in my hometown, we've gotten actually more money from brownfield grants than we have for GLRI stuff, even though it's helping our lakefront and our riverfront. Can you give a context to that at all in terms of if that's being broken out as you look at Great Lakes advocacy and what the likelihood of brownfield grants being restored or reestablished?
So that's a terrific question. Unfortunately, the skinny budget doesn't have a lot of details. I know when the initial leak of the Great Lakes, or the EPA cuts, did give a nice chart of all the programs. I don't know how official that is, so I would assume that the brownfield program, if under the proposed cuts, would see a significant reduction. I do think there's bipartisan support in Congress that a lot of Republican and Democratic districts benefit greatly from brownfields. So I think it's important to reach out to individual members, especially on the Appropriations Committee, and let them know the significance of those funds and where they go. I don't know exactly the breakdown of, because the budget that was released doesn't really have all the detailed tables, so I can't really speculate into exact numbers, but I would say that it's likely under the proposal that was sent to Congress on Thursday that they would see significant reductions.
Great. And Lisa, can you handle who's raising their hand with questions moving forward?
Yes, I can. I didn't see any hands raised. Just a reminder to those who are listening on the phone and not viewing the slides, if you have questions, please email them to me at GLLC@csg.org. And if anyone has a question and you're on the line, go ahead and raise your hand or type a question into the questions pane, and we'll be able to read that then. Check my email one last time to see if anyone's gotten anything in. I don't see it. Oh, a few people have asked if slides will be available, and the answer is yes, they definitely will, as will a recording. We'll post those on the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus website before morning. All right, I don't see any hands raised or questions in the queue. So Representative Mason, I'll turn it back to you then.
Okay. Well, before we move off this topic, just as a reminder, you should have all received a sign-on letter on the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funding cut, and my hope is if you haven't already responded to that via your email, you'll be willing to do that. We're hoping to get a broad and bipartisan supportive letter in as soon as possible to the congressional delegation and to the president, so he knows how important this is for legislators as well. So with that, if there's no further questions, I think what we're going to do is move to the regional roundtable. So what we wanted to ask each member to do is briefly spend a couple of minutes talking about jurisdictions in your respective, or developments in your respective jurisdictions. For some states, there are 2 or 3 members on the line, so it'll be up to those members to share the time, but we wanted to give each jurisdiction that's represented on the phone just a couple minutes to talk about pending legislation or policies that are developing in their state and what the analysis has been. So with that, we will start with Michigan, and I'm pleased on the line we have the Vice Chair of the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus, Senator Boer, and he is joined by Representative Maturin. Senator Boer, if you want to lead that conversation, we'd love to hear from you for a few minutes.
It is possible that Senator Boer is calling in on a line that is not accessible now. I think he may be just calling in and not viewing the slide. So I'm going to open up the line for Representative Maturin if he would like to say a few words. Go ahead, Representative. Your line should be open.
Well, is it open? Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes, we can.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. You're talking about new developments that are going on. I was kind of waiting to see what Senator Boer was talking about. I think I noted that we do have a couple of representatives that are also going to be circulating a resolution to support the GLRI in its entirety, I think tomorrow and the next day. So hopefully we'll pass something out of the Michigan House, hopefully similar to what we're going to be doing ourselves as a caucus.
Great. Any other developments in your state regarding Great Lakes policy?
No, nothing that I can think of off the top of my head. Probably should have been a little better prepared for this, and I just can't think of anything. Obviously, we're just all concerned about what's going on in Congress at the time, and know we have a pretty solid delegation, being the senators or representatives. But I can't really think of any issues outside, of course, of worrying about the Sioux locks and knowing whatever would ever happen if one of those locks shut down. Where would we be economically from a national perspective? So it's certainly an important issue to us to make sure that the one stays in operation, and hopefully we can get a new lock at some point in time, an additional lock.
Great. Any questions for Representative Maturin? If not, we will move on to past Great Lakes Legislative Chair, Senator Ann Rest, to give the report from Minnesota. Senator Rest, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. Well, two things that I would bring up. First of all, I do serve as a Great Lakes Commissioner from the state of Minnesota, along with Representative Jennifer Schultz. And we were in Washington this past week for the semi-annual meeting of the Great Lakes Commission and for Great Lakes Days. And one of the things that we did that I think might be very interesting to the members of the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus is finally adopt, and we have been working on it for a number of months, a resolution with regard to ballast water. And I think that might be of interest to members of the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus because it has been very controversial and very contentious, actually. But I think we finally arrived at wording of the resolution that is meaningful and substantial, and that I hope will be a guide for us for the next few years. Our policy is, after a resolution has been passed, we can review it any time, but after 10 years it is set aside, and if you want to have an additional resolution on the same topic, then you have to renew it, or you have to come up with a new one. And we decided to come up with a new one, and that resolution is the result of our work. In Minnesota, last year, we failed to pass a bonding bill, a capital investment bill, which had an appropriation to be matched by federal dollars for the St. Louis River estuary in Duluth Harbor AOC, which we share with the state of Wisconsin. Minnesota's share of that was in our bonding bill, and we failed to pass it. And so we are fairly distressed with regard to the zeroing out of the GLRI with regard to the future of that particular project. We're hoping to pass a bonding bill this year, but it will not, it obviously will not be able to leverage any funds from the GLRI if there are no funds there. And it's our understanding that there's the funds that we thought we might be levering in the past year's budget are no longer available. I might be wrong on that, but that's what we have been given to understand. So those are the two main things I would bring to the caucus attention, to have take a look at the Great Lakes Commission's resolution on ballast water that we adopted last Wednesday, and then just to report that we're still trying to work to further progress of our AOC on the St. Louis River estuary, but everything is kind of up in the air right now.
And Senator Rest, can you, Senator Rest, this is Representative Mason, can you explain how the Commission's position might be in line with or different from or nuanced from the caucus's past position on the vessel discharge legislation? Yeah.
I don't know that it's all that different, except that we certainly have a big presence on the Great Lakes Commission of the interests of the shippers, and that certainly is reflected. I don't have the language right, obviously right in front of me. I should have, I suppose. And so I don't know that when the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus takes a position on ballast water, that it is as inclusive of all the interest with regard to shipping on the Great Lakes as the Great Lakes Commission does. But I think it would be interesting for us to take a look at that and see if there are, quite frankly, if there are portions of that we might take issue with even. But I think it's a pretty comprehensive one. But Corey, I would just invite you to look it over, and maybe that can be a topic of conversation either at our annual meeting or at some other point.
Yeah, it's a great recommendation. Any questions?
Corey?
Yes?
Corey, can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
I can.
This is Senator Boer out of Michigan, and I guess I came in on the wrong line, so you couldn't hear me trying to speak, so I looked back and I had a different line I was supposed to call in on, so I apologize for that. At the appropriate time, I would add some things. I did hear Representative McKenna's statements. I have a few I would make.
Yeah, now would be an appropriate time, Senator Boer, so please go ahead.
Okay, well, in the Senate, we have concurrent resolution 7 on Asian carp. We reported that out of the Senate Natural Resource Committee, so that's being positioned to be voted on. We have Senate Resolution 19, which is nuclear waste. That's been referred to the Committee on Energy and Technology. I'm continuing to work on the possibility of aquaculture in Michigan. Nothing has been introduced at this point on that yet, but we're continuing to look at that aquaculture issue in Michigan. The other issues in Michigan are Nestle's water issue, the pumping of water for Nestle's. Line 5, Enbridge, that is still a continuing problem that we have with people. We need to have them on both those issues, get into the science behind it and not run off in emotions. So those are two big issues in Michigan. Lead in water is still certainly in Flint an issue for the state. We have just got the report out on all the counties in the state of Michigan and the lead levels. Genesee County, where Flint is in, ranks 38 out of from top to bottom being the worst in the state. So we have counties, one particular in my district, that's ranked number 8. So lead issues is going to be around for a while in the state of Michigan. And that was kind of my report for everyone.
That's a great report. Thank you very much. Now we'll move on to Ontario.
Representative Mason, this is Lisa. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to comment on something Senator Rest had said. Senator Rest, I'll look for the Great Lakes Commission resolution, and I also wanted to mention to everyone, I did see that they have some fact sheets available now on their website. They're from this month, detailing for each state the impact of the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, and I thought those looked like a good resource. So I'll send links to that information. And then I also wanted to mention that Representative Schultz had registered, and my apologies to her if she is just on the line, but she's not on the online part of the webinar, which means I can't unmute her line. So my apologies, Representative Schultz, if you're listening, and we're prepared to give a report because we can't open your line for the same reason that Senator Boer had mentioned earlier.
Okay. Well, great. Thank you for clarifying.
I would let you know that Representative Schultz is on the Great Lakes Commission as well, and was in the meeting last week in Washington, where we also, made visits to the Hill to Minnesota's congressional delegation.
That's great. Thank you very much, Senator Rest. Anything else from Minnesota? If not, we will look forward to sharing those materials and taking a look at that resolution. Senator, I think that may very well be an interesting topic for us to revisit at our next, maybe before our annual meeting, and in fact at our next June quarterly webinar.
Sure.
With that, I will move on to Speaker Levac from Ontario. Is the speaker on the line?
I'm hoping that you can hear my voice.
We can.
Oh, my goodness gracious. I want to first thank the staff for navigating to get me on the webinar, because I could only hear on the phone, and now I'm on the slides and everything. So thank you to your staff and my staff for navigating that for me quietly and secretly. And second of all, thanks to your staff, or the staff for our regional roundtable, for always putting these together. They're fantastic. So, Mr. Chairman, my report will be as brief as possible, so here we go. Bill 66, the Great Lakes Protection Act of 2015, requires the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change to maintain Ontario's Great Lakes strategy and to update it every 6 years. So the legislation demands that no matter what happens every 6 years, they must update the Great Lakes strategy. Bill 37, the Invasive Species Act of 2015, took effect November of 2016, and it makes Ontario the first jurisdiction in Canada to have a standalone invasive species statute as well. And the reason for that is there are more invasive species in Ontario than any other Canadian jurisdiction, regrettably. And that goes back to some of the comments that were made earlier regarding ballast and sharing water from the Great Lakes. As of January 1st, 2015, Ontario had enacted all of the regulatory measures required to meet its commitments under the Great Lakes St. Lawrence River Basin Sustainable Water Resources Agreement, which regulates transfer of water out of the Great Lakes Basin. So current issues, I would echo what my dear senator friend from Michigan indicated, Asian carp. We have all 3 levels of government working together on the Asian carp issue, along with several states. Federal, the Oceans and Fisheries; local, the conservation authorities of each of the regions; and the Ministry of Natural Resources and Fisheries from the province of Ontario, adapting some of the science and some of the techniques, and as well as doing the study about the Asian carp. The OPG, the Ontario Power Generation Nuclear Waste Disposal Plan, which is mentioned earlier in the webinar. Ontario's power generation's proposal to build a deep rock nuclear waste storage facility at the Bruce Nuclear Plant in Kincardine, Ontario, remains controversial on both sides of the border. The Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency at a federal level, who makes those decisions, has until late 2017 to issue a final decision on the proposal. You will know that they did send them back. They sent Bruce Nuclear back with an option, another option requesting alternate sites. The Waukesha Water Diversion of 2016, the regional body established under the Great Lakes St. Lawrence River Basin Sustainable Water Resources Agreement, approved an application by the city of Waukesha, Wisconsin, to divert water from Lake Michigan. Ontario opposed the original proposal, but did support the revised version approved by the regional body. However, the province of Ontario's government remains apprehensive about any diversion by Waukesha. The Lake Erie water quality. Ontario, Michigan, and Ohio agreed in 2015 to reduce the amount of phosphorus entering the Lake Erie over a 10-year period. However, a recent report from the International Joint Commission concluded that Lake Erie water quality is unacceptable and that mandatory measures are required to meet phosphorus reduction targets. Those are on the negotiating table for what next in terms of actions to reduce that unacceptable rating to acceptable. And finally, and last but not least, Representative Mason, Ontario, as you all know, is unique in terms of the speaker speaking on behalf of the Ontario government, which he does not do, did approve of the letter, but could not be a signatory given the relationship between Canada and the United States through Prime Minister Trudeau and President Trump. We are in favor of the letter, but we cannot sign it.
Thank you for that clarification and that update. That was very helpful. Are there questions for the speaker? I'm just trying to think if we, while we've got you, speaker, if you want to just say a few words about hosting the annual meeting while we've got you on the line, coming up in September.
I'd be honored and privileged if you allowed me to do that. I was prepared to do that later, but I'll do it now and it'll save us some time. So, Ontario is looking forward to hosting the next GLLC annual meeting in Toronto in September. There's a great deal of staff work that's already started, and we are looking forward to a wonderful conference at the Radisson Admiral Hotel, which is located right on the waterfront and has a stunning view of both the lake and the downtown. So if you think you're only getting to see the lake, if you're on the other side, you get to see a nice vista as well. So there is no bad room in the Radisson. And if there is, blame somebody else. I'm not responsible for it. For the visit, a site visit, we want to focus on the Toronto Harbor for you. And we actually get to go out on the lake on a boat tour as part of that education process of the harbor. We're also planning something very special as a welcoming reception. And I'd like to welcome all of the delegates to Ontario Legislative Building, which is also my home. We're the only ones in Canada that do this. The speaker's apartment is built right into the legislature, so I can't play hooky and I can't be late. And I know a lot of work is being done behind the scenes from both staffs and planning the meetings and sessions. So we'll have an interesting topics. And again, for this year, I hope to see all of you there. And I hope that's enough of a snapshot and a teaser for all of you to sign up. Hello? Any questions?
No, I don't hear any questions. Speaker, thank you very much.
Representative Mason, this is Lisa. I just wanted to remind you that we do have, even though she's not showing on the slide, Representative Robin Gable is on the line from Illinois.
Oh, great. Robin, if you'd like to give your report, that would be great.
I'll unmute your line, Representative Gable.
Am I on?
Representative Gable.
Am I on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chairman. This was an interesting slideshow. So in Illinois, last year we passed a big bill around energy and renewable energy. So this year, I think the main bill I'm going to talk about is to a bill to get rid of coal tar. I think this was something that we learned about actually on one of our Great Lakes trips and conferences. So we've been trying for about 3 years to ban coal tar use here in Illinois. Some of our cities have done it, but we're facing an uphill battle here in the legislature. There apparently are some factories that produce it, and the unions are very close with the manufacturers, so they're against it. So we're having some struggle here, but we're going to try to get it out of committee again next week. And I feel like as long as there's alternatives to it, there really is no reason to keep this carcinogenic substance around that poisons our waters as well. So that's where we're at with our coal tar bill. And we have tested many of the schools in Illinois around lead, and I think last year we passed a bill around lead testing and ideas for ways that we can get lead out of, or not. I think what they mainly said is if you got a lead in your drinking fountain, turn it off. So hopefully we can do better than that, right?
And as you've done your testing, do you have a sense of like the percentage that came back positive for lead?
It wasn't as high as we had expected. I remember that. This was last year's deal, but I can get you that information.
That'd be great. Any questions for the Illinois report? Or, I'm sorry, is that the end of your report?
Yes.
Any questions for Illinois? Okay, great. And then do we have Representative Sonny from Pennsylvania on the line?
I do not see him online. Again, he could be calling in, but I do know he was going to be in session earlier today, and it was possible he was going to have to miss the call. So he is probably not on.
Completely understandable. You got to be on the floor first and foremost. Well, then
and how can we get these slides, Corey? How can we get the slides again?
Oh, Lisa, you want to give an update on where on the website they'll be able to find them tomorrow?
Sure. It'll be on at greatLakesLegislators.org, and what I'll do after this webinar is over, I'll make sure the slides get posted, and I'll send a link around to everybody who registered for the webinar so that you'll have the link straight to where you'll find these slides and also the recording. You'll also get just an automatically generated message from GoToWebinar, but you'll get a separate message from me through Outlook. And I'll also follow up with the Great Lakes Commission fact sheets, a link to those, and also to the resolution that Senator Resch mentioned earlier.
Great. So I'll go ahead and give the Wisconsin report, unless I've missed a jurisdiction that's on the line. Lisa, I don't know if you can confirm that we've covered all the jurisdictions that are currently represented on the call.
We have covered all of the ones I can see, yes. So please feel free to give the report for Wisconsin.
Great. So in Wisconsin, a couple of developments. Of course, we're still reeling from the GLRI and, frankly, the brownfields recommendations in terms of what that'll do for cleanup and recommendations moving forward on economic development. But then a couple of other interesting developments that have emerged. We've had a bill introduced on allowing and regulating to some extent aquaculture in the Great Lakes in Wisconsin, which has a lot of questions raised at this point. Thankfully, we have the UW School of Freshwater Science, which many of you got to tour at our meeting in Milwaukee, that has a lot of expertise about the veracity of the proposal, but that's just now being introduced and reviewed. I suspect that this is going to be a topic, as Senator Bohr mentioned, that we'll continue to have conversations about as we move forward in this discussion about what to do about aquaculture generally, and then also specifically in the lakes. And then in addition, we've also introduced bills around lead water, introducing a bill similar to the ones referenced in Illinois that would require lead testing in schools and daycare facilities that we hope will garner some bipartisan support this year. And then so far this year, we've been pleased with the bipartisan, at least initial bipartisan support for the letter in opposition to the elimination of the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. There's some other smaller details, but those are basically the big developments so far here in Wisconsin. Are there any questions about Wisconsin, or I don't know if my colleague Nick Milroy or anyone else from Wisconsin is on the line would like to offer comments, but if not, that is the Wisconsin report.
I don't see any hands raised or questions typed up, and I'm not getting any in my email, so go right ahead.
Okay, great. Well, again, everyone, thanks very much. I want to thank Speaker Levac for covering the details of the annual meeting. I do want to mention the sign-on letter on the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. It was originally circulated assuming that what had been leaked was the case that it would be a 97% reduction in funding and not a complete elimination of the funding. So the letter has been modified to reflect that new reality. So I just wanted to make sure that people knew about it. And then the other thing well, Michigan certainly leads the way on this in terms of legislators from both parties taking action to try to secure GLRI funding. It's great to get colleagues of yours on board with this, but I would encourage people to try to talk to colleagues on both sides of the aisle in terms of signing on to the letter. The new deadline to sign on to the letter is March 29th, so we would like to get something before then. And as a reminder, Speaker Levac talked about the annual meeting, but it is September 22nd and 23rd, and early registration will open in May. And then at the meeting, we will also have resolutions to be considered. Strangely, last year we had little or none of them to consider. We were certainly dominated by issues that we discussed, but we didn't have specific resolutions. I don't know that that's necessarily bad. I know Senator Rest sort of talked about the Great Lakes Commission having, issues that are perennial, that they're constantly dealing with. I don't think it's a bad thing that we're constantly fighting for a Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funding, and that we're constantly having these conversations about ballast water and invasive species. But if people have reaffirmations of positions that they'd like us to take, or new positions that they think are important for us to take, we will have resolutions that are going to be considered at our annual meeting. I would invite all of you to begin thinking about those now. And then I also wanted to mention, just before we close, and on the annual meeting, we will hope once again to be able to offer travel scholarships to GLLC members who need them. So registering early certainly makes a difference there. And then I also want to mention that Senator Charbonneau will be hosting, with other Indiana legislators, a Great Lakes policy workshop for Indiana coming Wednesday, March 22nd, from 11:30 to 1:15. So this is coming Wednesday. The subject is the state of Indiana's water infrastructure, with speakers from the Alliance for the Great Lakes and the Indiana Finance Authority. And members from Indiana who may be on the line may be able to register with the CSG Midwest office. Senator Charbonneau was great in leading the effort to organize the workshop. We have hosted workshops in the past in Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, Minnesota, and Ohio. They're found to be very valuable and do a lot to encourage our colleagues from the respective jurisdictions to become members of the GLLC. If you would like to have one in your state, please contact Lisa. And that's basically a wrap on the meeting today. I'd like to thank everyone for participating. And with that, I will turn things back over to Lisa.
Thank you, Representative Mason, and thank you to our speaker and to the executive committee members and all the participants today. Remember, you can view any of the caucus's webinars at any time by visiting the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus website or CSG Midwest YouTube channel. I'll share those links with all of you later today. And I hope members will watch for the monthly member updates that I send through email. Representative Mason mentioned the sign-on letter. I use these member updates to get information out to all of you about things like sign-on letter opportunities, workshops, or web meetings like this one. So please make sure to watch for those in your inbox. The legislative trackers that the Council of State Governments prepares will be updated in the coming 2 weeks. We'll make sure the bills that were and resolutions that were mentioned on today's web meeting will be reflected in the legislative trackers. And I hope members who sponsor legislation that relates to the Great Lakes will remember to send an email to give us a heads up. You can just email me at GLLC@csg.org, and I'll make sure it gets incorporated into the tracker. This concludes today's web meeting. I hope you all will enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you.
Thank you.